You're listening to Stories Behind the Songs with Chris Blair. For more information, check out chrisblair.com. Hey everyone, here's another episode of Stories Behind the Songs. I'm your host, Chris Blair, and in this episode, we're going to sit down with Kelly Archer. Kelly's originally from Vancouver, British Columbia, and she's got songs that have been recorded by Jason Aldean, Dustin Lynch, Eli Young Band, Montgomery Gentry, Reba McEntire, Trisha Yearwood, Cassadee Pope, several Canadian artists, so many more. It was just such a great episode. You're going to hear the story of how she grew up and how she dipped her toe into songwriting at a very early age by rewriting another popular song, but how that made her begin to follow that path. She had a very eclectic taste in music, and that also helped her open her mind to a lot of different ways to write. Her dedication to do this in Nashville is so inspiring. You'll hear about the over 20,000 miles that she drove back and forth from Canada to work and save money to come back to Nashville and do this and chase this dream. That dedication has definitely paid off, and although she was just about to head back home for good, you'll hear the story of how she got talked into staying and shortly after that had her first #1 with Brett Young's Sleep Without You. You'll hear the story about that song, along with her song Somebody Else Will that she wrote for Justin Moore and For Her for Chris Lane. Hear the lessons that she learned along the way and some great advice that she shares. It was a pleasure having her on. This is Kelly Archer. Let's get to it. Hey everybody, here's another episode of Stories Behind the Songs, and I am here today with Kelly Archer. What's up?
Hello, how are you?
Good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming in, and you're about to take a little vacay soon.
Yes, Pacific Northwest, here I come. I can't wait. Fresh air, ocean, mountains. I'm really excited.
It's gonna be nice.
It's gonna be very nice.
Well, speaking of that, take me back to Canada. Like that's how you got into music.
I did.
What was your progression when you were growing up, and like where did you figure out like, hey, I want to do this, and when did that lead to Nashville?
I mean, it can go back pretty far because of my dad. My dad owned a country bar when I was growing up, one of the very few in Vancouver. I was one of those kids whose favorite singer growing up was like Kenny Rogers and the Gambler album. And my friends were like, who? But we always had like the most random, like we had CCR in the house, and my dad was in bands. So like it was like CCR and Frank Sinatra and Tom Jones and Engelbert Humperdinck. And then like just a whole bunch of random stuff. And he owned this country bar till I was about 12. So we were just around music. My dad played music. He was in a band. And then after that, in like high school, I started doing musical theater, and I got the gig as Daisy May in Little Abner, and I joined like a 3-part harmony kind of Supremes-ish girl group called the Chiclets. Shout out to my old school Chiclets. And we got to do a lot of shows. We actually got to perform in like Disney World and Universal Studios and stuff. So, and then my brother started doing hip hop, and I got really into R&B music, 90s R&B. And then somebody dropped me a tape, a cassette tape of The Dance by Garth Brooks. And I started listening to country again. And my first actual humble beginnings as a writer was that I was in my church band, my local, in the school gymnasium, Sunday church, non-denominational church. And we were in the band, and we sang really cool songs. Like we would do Blackbird, and we would do all these different songs. And then we were doing a Father's Day service, and there were no happy Father's Day songs. So I said, well, there's this one Reba McEntire song that's really sad, but I bet I could change the lyrics. So I rewrote the lyrics to The Greatest Man I Never Knew into The Greatest Man I Ever Knew. And I'm sure if I could remember how it went, it was very cheesy. It was like, he taught me how to ride a bike. But it was to the melody of that song. And after we performed it that weekend, somebody from the band said, did you rewrite those lyrics? And I said, yeah. And he's like, that was really good. And I was like, really? And that was the first bug of like, oh, writing lyrics. And so I picked up a guitar. I maybe knew just 2 chords at the time, learned maybe a third along the way. And that's kind of like the very early beginnings of becoming a writer, or starting to want to become a writer. I didn't really know it was a job.
Yeah.
I didn't know this was a job that you'd sustain over a period of time. That's a big surprise to me.
Yeah.
So I kind of stumbled into it a little bit like that.
Yeah, I think most people do. It's, when I sit down, like even like people like you that have so much success, it's the same thing over and over. It's like, when we're growing up listening to these cassette tapes, like, that's what we grew up listening to. It's like you just assume that's like the person singing it, that's where the song came from. And
they wrote it on their bedroom floor, cross-legged, or sitting in their house, and that's just how it was. But I did start, I was a big like Whitney Houston fan, and then I was a big, Bob Marley fan. Like I had a really eclectic music. I was super into John Cougar Mellencamp for a while, and then like the Fugees and just TLC. Like there was just a wide array of stuff I listened to. So I really think that that's been really beneficial to me. Like growing up knowing really old school cool music, and then living through the 80s and 90s of like rock and R&B, and I just really loved it. I loved it. I was like the girl singing into the hairbrush in the bathroom.
Yeah.
With the one fake tear rolling down my face. I just loved the whole drama of it, and
Yeah. So then you decide that you are going to come pursue this.
Yes.
So talk me through that decision that you had to make between New York and Nashville. Yeah.
So I got out of high school. I did really well in school, got a scholarship, and I just kind of was anti the grading system. Didn't believe in pigeonholing people. So, and to be quite frank, I don't think I had any academic aspirations enough to want to chase anything. So I got a job at a bank as a bank teller, and then I continued to do some theater while I decided, okay, is there a performing arts school? What should I do? And I lost my voice, and I had to wait on a surgery for a couple of years. So I just really dug into the bank, and they kept sending me to courses, and I got my mutual funds license, and I was managing a small branch of the HSBC Bank when I was like 22, and I was bored. And then I had my surgeries, and I started singing and playing again. And at that point, I was really, really into country music. And I had that experience where I'd rewritten that one song, and I just was like messing around with writing, but I might have written 1 or 2 songs at this point. And it's like, I got to do something. So coming from Canada, it's very scary coming to the States because you can't work. So it's like, how am I going to do this? So I saved a lot of money. Like I always had 2 or 3 jobs as a teenager, but I really saved my money. Moved to Calgary for about 6 months, thinking maybe I could take country music there, because that was the sort of the mecca for country at the time back there. But very quickly I was like, if I want to do this, I got to go to Nashville.
Yeah.
So I want to say I flipped a coin, because that's not literal, but like I was really debating, and it just seemed like Nashville was a safer choice at the time, an easier choice. It didn't seem as scary as going to New York City. And then I told my parents, I'm like, I'm moving back home, and I'm going to save up money for 1 year, and I'm leaving a year from today. Just gave myself that goal. And then January 7th, 2001 rolled along, and my car was packed, and I was like, well, I guess I'm going. No plan. I had a AAA flip map. I had no cell phone at the time, because that was new, and I was like, who's going to carry a phone around? Of course, that's all in the past. But I didn't have a phone at the time. I had a AAA flip map. I had some money that, you lose half in exchange back then on Canadian money into U.S. dollars. And I drove from the west coast of Canada to California, hung a left on 40. And so it took about 5 days, because it was wintertime. But it was a 52-hour drive for me to come here. And I rented a little room in a house in Bellevue from a older couple that were originally from Canada. I'd met through my aunt. And I just started wandering around. I really didn't know a soul. I went to everything NSAI put on, anything ASCAP, BMI put on that was free. I showed up at every workshop with my tape, and I just started wandering around. And then the lady I was renting from brought a bunch of sweet treats after Christmas to a few companies, and she was like, do you want to ride along with me? I said, sure. There was a company at Cummins Station that did digital pitching, and it was like a brand new thing because the internet was sort of just like this, the whole digital thing was just starting to happen. So I walked in carrying a pie, and that office had a bunch of young people in it. So about a week later, it was a beautiful day out, and I was so lonely and bored and missing my friends and no one to talk to. And so I just drove over to that place again, and I walked in and I said, hi. And they're like, can we help you? And I was like, yeah, I'm new to town and I don't really have any friends. And does anybody know anything I can do? And they were like, and this girl, Amber Dodson, I don't know if you remember Amber Dodson.
Yeah.
She was working there, and she goes, my boyfriend's band's playing at Douglas Corner. You can come see that. I was like, I'll be there.
Wow.
And so, and they remembered me. They called me Apple Pie Kelly. Oh, you brought the apple pie. I was like, yeah, Apple Pie Kelly. Yeah, that's my name, you know? So I showed up at Douglas Corner, and Amber was talking to a guy named Chris Burgess.
Yeah.
Who became a friend, and he goes, I love Canadians. I just had a song cut by Emerson Drive. He's like, meet me on the Music Row, and I'll walk you around the next day. So he did. And from there, I just started meeting people. So that was kind of like my very humble beginnings. And then I couldn't work here, so my money would run out after about 8 weeks. And so I would drive 3,000 miles home to my 3 jobs, save up money for about 10 or 12 weeks, turn around and drive back. So I did 7 one-way drives in my first 18 months before I got my first publishing deal.
Wow.
Like 21,000 miles before just to work at Red Robin.
Yeah.
In a warehouse. So it was definitely the long route, but I'll say it built some character.
Yeah.
And I also recorded a lot of ideas on those drives. I listened to a lot of music on those drives, you know?
Wow, that's incredible. And that sounds just like Chris too. He's just such a great soul.
Awesome dude.
Yeah.
My first #1 party, I reached out to every one of my first publishers and Chris, and I said, please come. And I worked my way backwards from how I got to this point when I was thanking people, and it went all the way back to Chris Burgess. And he was the last person because I feel like he was the first person to take me around and walk me around. So, and my first publisher was Cole Wright. And, you know, like I just kind of went backwards on like, it's not a straight line to get here. And here I was 15 years later, and I thanked people all the way down the line to the very beginning because it was such a weird career. You need those little baby steps to get started. You know, it's the people you meet, kind of one to the next kind of thing. So
that's such a beautiful story. I've been to so many #1 parties, and I don't know. You know, I've heard a lot of people thanked, but just the fact that you did that and to go all the way back to the beginning. I mean, you know, a lot of people don't do that. You know, they're looking at the here and now and like, and I'm sure like very grateful of the path that they took, right? Yeah. But to mention it, that says a lot about you. That's really cool.
I think it's important. You know, and you meet people along the way, and then you don't necessarily end up in the same path. Your path changes. You end up finding your people. You do all this stuff, and you know. So I hadn't seen Chris in a few years, but I was like 100% sure I wanted to call him and personally please be there.
Yeah.
You know, please come and. You know, you're part of the journey here. So
I'm sure that meant so much to him too.
Yeah, he showed up. It was really nice to see him.
So So you're in town, you're meeting people. Apple Pie Kelly is going out to shows and meeting friends.
Way too friendly and unaware of what's to come. Yeah.
So then what happens? Like you get when you got your first cut that was really really starting to go, okay, wow, like I can do this.
My first cut was a big lesson in the crash and burn. So you hear, this is a 10-year town. I'm like, okay, I don't have anything else to do. I'll be here, right?
Yep.
And I got my first publishing deal, and I was at a company called Island Bound. And at the time, Island Bound was a strong independent company, independent publishers. Before there were a lot of independent publishers, like they were one of a small group. But there were incredible writers there. Stephen Dale Jones was there. Jim McBride was there. Phil Billy was there. Jamie Paulin was one of the young writers there. And Max T. Barnes was there. And Max wrote a ton of my favorite, Diamond Rio songs. I was super into the harmonies of Diamond Rio. And I was like, I couldn't believe I was getting to write with these guys. Like, One More Day was out, and I was writing with Stephen Dale Jones. And I was like, what? And then I got into write with Max, and it was just a two-way, and we wrote this really fun little ditty called It's Friday. And it was very much in the lines of Diamond Rio at the time. And I was like, oh, I want Diamond Rio cut so bad. Well, the song ends up getting cut by Trace Atkins. And I think he was on Lyric Street Disney at the time. And I'm so new. This is year one and a half. And I get this big cut, and it's going to be the single. And I'm like, 10-year town, 10-year schmal, look at me. Like, I was so excited. They released the song. Rolling Stones does an article on the single, and it gets a rave review. And I'm like, holy smokes, I'm in Rolling Stone magazine. Freaking out. Like 6 weeks into the song, he asks off the label. And it was like a crash. It was such a crash when you're that oblivious to how this works, oblivious to the pitfalls that this could happen. I mean, back then it was traumatic to lose a hold, like what, But that was my first hard lesson. But I mean, it was also a taste of like what could happen too. So I was at that publisher for 2 years, and I had a whole bunch of stuff along the way. Lots of album cuts. I had a few songs on that first Dustin Lynch record. Almost got a single there. I had a pretty big song on Jason Aldean's second record, the Wide Open record. That was for a long time, was my only really big, that album went platinum.
Yeah.
We almost had a single 5 times. It was like, well, it's either going to be you or this song called Big Green Tractor. I was like, Big Green Tractor. It's like, I was so sure about this song, you know. And then Big Green Tractor. And then it was like, it's between you or the truth. And then it's like, it's between this or... And so we went all the way along and didn't get that single. And that was really disappointing, but it still was my first platinum. So by the time I actually had a hit, it was... I mean, just a slight backtrack is I was leaving my 4th publishing deal, 15 years in. I was out of debt. I had a good run, and I was kind of like, getting older. Folks are getting older. My cousins are having kids. Do I want to be doing this forever if I'm not really getting... It was a real heart of the bro country movement. I'm not anti-bro country, by the way. I'm just saying at that time it was hard to write for that because it got real campy for a while, and I wasn't in those camps. So I was like, is it worth being this far away from family, or did I have my run and was this fun and I need to find something else to do? And Jeremy Stover took me to breakfast and was like, I'm opening a publishing company. I think you need to stay. I just think you need a different opportunity. So I did. And then, so it was 15, 16 years before I actually had my first big hit come out.
Yeah.
And it was a surprise because it was a brand new artist. So it was not what I thought was going to happen. I didn't write a song for Keith Urban and then have my hit I've been waiting for. It was a brand new artist. And if I look back at the songs I've actually had hit, 3 of the 4 of my number ones have been the first for the artist. And I was like, oh, maybe that's my thing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's my thing, maybe. So I write with a lot of new artists because of that.
Yeah.
That's been sort of where my luck fell.
Yeah.
So.
And we were talking earlier about, back in the day where you used to play listening room,
Sure.
multiple times a week sometimes, just all the time. And but that camp that you were hanging out with, that's the same thing, like with Brian Davis and Lee, like two dudes that were just very close and and they're still hanging out and writing songs together.
Oh yeah.
So I think
we were all friends like that group, the Randy I wasn't super close because I didn't maybe party as hard as those guys, but I was around all of that, like Brian Davis and Jared Neiman and Randy Houser. We did a bunch of writers camps together. Yeah, John Stone, all those guys. Like I was super friendly with all those guys, but we played a lot of shows. And Justin Weaver is somebody that we've written together for 20 years together before we had our first #1 together. But we wrote that Aldean song together, and there was just a lot of people that you were friends with for 20 years, and then everyone kind of went off and did their own thing a little bit. But I used to sit and play all the time. I'd be in between Brian Davis and Lee Brice, and I remember I always had to pause because Lee would sing some big such a great singer, and then he'd sing like some sexy love ballad, and I'd be like, I need a minute before I can sing. I got me real hot and bothered, But yeah, it was just really fun times playing. I mean, I used to be thrilled playing 4 or 5 times a week.
Yeah.
Now I'm more too tired to do that. But yeah, I had a blast.
Yeah.
It was so much fun. And back then, we never made a dime off any of those shows, because you just did it to socialize and to network
meet
and
people.
stuff. Yeah. And Nashville has become such a tourist hub that now it makes sense that, people make a little bit of money when they play these shows, but back then we just did it for an education. It was sort of college, to do all of that. So I loved those days.
They were a lot of fun.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, so you're at the #1 and you're going back and you're thanking everybody backwards.
Yes.
Take me further back. Take me into the idea in the writer's room for that first
song?
#1. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So my really good friend Ronna Reeves, she runs a independent plugging company called Showbiz Row, and she kept telling me about Brett Young. And she was working with the people he was working with, and kind of saying he was still in California, I believe, and coming back and forth. And she's like, he's in talks to do a record deal. And, you hear that a lot. Oh, they're talking to somebody. You're like, okay, all right, I'll believe it when I see it, kind of thing. And I just started writing with Justin Ebach. And I had this date set up, and I invited Justin to jump on the write. I loved what he did. And in walks Brett and sits down, and he immediately starts talking about his dad. And he's like, hey, so I just got off the phone with my dad, and my mom's out of town. And he said he's having a real hard time sleeping without her there because he's so used to her being there. And I was in a long-term relationship, so could we do like a younger version of that? And I remember sitting there in that room, and I immediately was like, I grew up on John Hughes movies and Sex and the City. Like, I always want there to be a serendipitous, like, romantic thing. But I got into the mindset of writing for boys for a period of time where we wrote a lot about tight jeans and meeting a girl in a bar and drinking and buying her a drink and this and that. So I remember going like, you mean a mature relationship? Yeah, I super want to write about that. So we started writing, and it really fell out. Like, we wrote the song pretty quickly. I feel like all three of us just were like, yeah, this and this and this and this. And we wrote it fairly quickly within a couple of hours. And then we walked from Word, where we were writing, over to where Justin had a studio over at Warner, recorded it, and Justin's super fast with turnaround on demos. And they sent it to me by like dinner time, 5, 6 o'clock. And I was like typing. I go, guys, I may have just danced around my house, or danced around my kitchen for the last 30 minutes to this song, but I love it. I just had a feeling that it was like a good, I mean, I don't want to like downgrade it by saying it's a nice love ditty, but I'm someone who really appreciates a good feel-good song.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to come to town and be the female Craig Wiseman. I wanted to write the happy, fun, summertime songs. So I really appreciate that. So I was like, man, this just feels good. And then Brett went on to write or to sign his deal very quickly, and they picked that as the first single. So like that was such a surprise. And then you got a new artist, and it's like, is it going to work? And people just really loved the song.
Yeah.
So, you know, it took the long route songs take on radio. Now I want to say we were at maybe 48 weeks when that song hit. But that was the first #1. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, I think every songwriter has a little bit of doubt and are self-conscious about what other people think of them. And when you're in it 15 years in, I was a little unsure of, you know, probably cared way too much about what people thought about me and was like, oh, people, I don't know if anyone even likes me, you know, like having those little doubts you have as a songwriter. And when that song went #1, the amount of authentic love bombing I got from like text of congratulations and people calling and people texting and people commenting on social media, like I felt this wave of like, not just you've worked really hard for this, like, but then there were a lot of people who were like, man, you really stuck it out, which makes me feel like I can stick it out. Like,
wow. Yeah.
And I was like, the whole way, it was really, it was way more emotional. I was way less concerned about, you know, the plaque or the #1 party or the money that was going to come and follow that. It really felt like, oh, like this is what it feels like. This is what we're all chasing a little bit. So it was really overwhelmingly emotional. And then I really, really lucked out. I know some people get mad when you say you lucked out because I did work, but I really don't think it happens without the mixture of both. I really believe that. There are great writers that have not had a #1. I feel like I was a good writer before I had a #1.
Yeah.
It didn't make me a better writer. I just had some stuff pan out. So, yeah, I just was really lucky at that time because that song hit, and then I had 2 more songs coming out or starting on the charts, and then those 2 songs paralleled. So I was just a few spots on that 3rd song away from having a triple play after having no big singles for 15 years. So all of a sudden there was this, people remembered who you were, people were coming and calling you, and that whole energy shift changed. It really changed my career, that first song hitting and then what followed that.
Yeah.
So I was really lucky.
And Brett just killed it. I mean, he and I were very close, you know, and it still are. I mean, he's, you know, he's still, I consider him a great friend. But, you know, I remember being in the Gulch. There was about 10 people or so in the Gulch celebrating his birthday. And he was talking about like, man, I might just go back home.
Yeah.
You know, like,
you hear that story a lot.
You know, his girlfriend, now wife, was, you know, he was trying to do this long distance thing, and it was, you know, it's like, it's just the struggle and the battle of like letting someone else kind of, you're doing everything that you can, but because of the business side of this, it's, you know, you kind of have to have every check mark, you know, and everybody say, okay, we're going to push your song. And so grateful that he did stick it out, because I mean, it's just, I remember
he's got a really special voice.
That's what I was gonna say. I remember like you know, when I would watch people when he would play rounds, you know, and it's like, and I would hear people listen to other people who are also great performers, right? But they would sound just like this artist or whatever. And I would hear people go, oh my gosh, they're so good. And I would think they are, but there's already that.
Right.
And it was the different unique voices like Brett's that I would just like stop in my tracks and go, whoa, like.
And there was a maturity to him. You know, he wasn't like 21 and drinking in bars,
right.
You know. The one thing I really appreciate about Brett that doesn't even have to do with my songs is that for me, he brought back space in songs. Like he gave permission in his own songs for there to be space between lines. And I know my song's wordy in the chorus. It's not as wordy in the verses. But then like the song after me, which was such a huge hit, In Case You Didn't Know, there's so much space that I don't know if at the time writers were allowing themselves the conversational speak with space in it, which took me back to like a time when I listened. Like it took me back to Boyz II Men. It took me back to Bryan Adams. It took me back to like where there was just space in songs. And I really think he was the first one to start doing that again. And even as a listener, it felt like it gave me permission as a writer to start doing that too. And I really think he brought that back, which is kind of a funny little story, is that the amount of things that have come from Sleep Without You is just so beyond the #1 song. But he ended up doing a Crossroads with Boyz II Men.
Yeah, I was there. Yeah.
Boyz II Men was like the mecca for me in high school. Like End of the Road was my graduation song. And I was obsessed, right? So I find out, I get a sync request that they're going to do my song. They didn't end up doing my song. They canceled it last minute, which I didn't even care. I mean, I did care, but I didn't care, as in it didn't wreck my time. So I arranged for tickets to CMT, like with a bunch of my girlfriends. We go get some Chewies. We head over. We're right in the front row, you know, and I'm like, I cannot believe I'm finally seeing a Boyz II Men concert after all this time. I had never seen them live. And I was like, I knew I loved Brett because he also loves Boyz II Men. Like, I was so excited. And so I'm standing in the front, and they're doing this show, and they're like, right before, they're like, hey, we cut the song. I was like, I don't care. So I'm sitting there, and I'm just in full geek out, super fan mode. All of my friends had put their purses down, and then there was this gap between us and the stage where the cameraman could go around. And they start singing End of the Road. And I'm full on into it, and I'm waving my hand in the air, and I'm singing at the top of my lungs, and I'm turning around, and I'm singing full gusto to my friends. And one of the guys from Boyz II Men walks over and hears me singing so loud that he waves me over, but I don't see him because my eyes are closed because I'm singing so hard. And one of my friends just shoves me full palm in the back, and I trip over our bags into the stage, and he shoves the mic in front of me. And now I'm singing End of the Road.
I remember
with Boyz II
this,
Men.
yes.
And Brett hasn't seen that it's me yet. And I'm just singing full voice in my absolute pleasure to be there. And I remember John Knight's wife also like sent me a video from like way above. But anyways, all that to say, and then the song was over, and Brett looks over and he goes, hey, she wrote my first song with me like this. I was like, oh my gosh, kind of embarrassing, but kind of just awesome.
Yeah.
So like, I was like, if this is the only reason I came to Nashville, and everything added up to this moment where I sang End of the Road with Boyz II Men, I'm like, I'll take it. Like, if this was it, this was the moment I was waiting for. So many things came from that song.
But I love it.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Brit Skin Beauty. Located in the beautiful Indulgence Medi Spa in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, Brittany is the go-to esthetician for facials, dermaplaning, microdermabrasion, waxing, lashes, and any skincare products and consultations. So many people in the music industry use her frequently, and her work speaks for itself. To schedule your next consultation or make an appointment, visit britskinbeauty.com or send an email to britskinbeauty@gmail.com.
So then what was, you've got 3 songs out at the same time coming up. So you walk me through the next hit and kind of like, things started happening pretty fast for you.
Yeah, there was like this period of time where all of a sudden a bunch of songs hit. So that song hit, and then I wrote a song with Adam Hambrick and my good buddy Tebe Otto, just an outside song. Me and Adam took it into the studio, recorded it. Adam sang a version of it, and Adam's such an incredible singer too. He had a bunch of runs in it and the melody and the chorus. And we find out that it's on hold for somebody over at Big Machine, and we're like, oh, so Rascal Flatts is what we're thinking. And then we find out that it's Justin Moore. And I had sent that song to Dustin Lynch already, and Dustin was really kind. He, we called him and we're like, Justin Moore wants to cut this song. Do you want this song? And he's like, he goes, I love the song. He's like, but we're looking at something else right now for vibe-wise. He's like, and I don't want them to lose the cut. So he let it go, which doesn't always happen. So I really appreciated that from him. And, I got to give kudos to Jeremy Stover because, he's producing Justin Moore. And I can tell you, I wasn't thinking Justin Moore on that song. Jeremy heard Justin Moore on that song. And when Justin got a hold of it, he didn't do the runs. He made it Justin Moore.
Yeah.
And it sounded awesome. And that song did really, really well for us. And that ended up being our second #1 song. And then the third one I had out at that time was a Chris Lane song. And I wrote it with Matt Dragstrom and Sarah Buxton. And Sarah's the one, she's like, I really believe in this kid, and let's write specifically for him. I was like, let's write a big love ballad. And we wrote it that day. Sarah sang the fire out of it. And we walked it down to Joey downstairs. And he's like, yeah, I love it. I'll cut it. And that was like, that never happens. We aimed, we shot, and we bullseyed, with it. And that song spent a year on the charts, a full year, and went #1 in Canada. And then we dipped our toe into the top 10. So had that one hit, it would have been a triple play for me that year, which would have been incredible. But obviously, I'm not complaining.
Yeah.
I'll take a million top 10s, please. You know what I mean? If I never have a #1 again, but you just keep hitting me with top 10s, I'll take it.
Yeah.
But Chris did such a good job of that song. It was a song called For Her. And so all those kind of hit in a row, which changed everything as far as, didn't change necessarily the way I wrote. I have to say, real quick to go back, is when I had decided that I was maybe going to call it, and Jeremy Stover was like, stay, I want to sign you to my publishing company I'm opening. I said, okay, but I'll give you 18 months. Because that'll give me time to like get my affairs in order and sell my house and whatnot. And I said, I'm doing whatever I want. I'm just going to go back to what I like. Because I felt like I was really chasing after some stuff. I felt like I was chasing what was happening. And that is exhausting. So to any songwriter out there listening, it's like you've got to create the next thing. You can't chase after, and there's no promising, even if you got with those people, they're not even doing that. They already did it. Most of those songs they wrote 2 years ago. So you have to figure out that if you like it and you're a fan of the music, it's like someone else is also going to like it. So you kind of got to do it your way. And so that's what I kind of did, and that started working for me. It was the first time I kind of let my tight grip of trying to make it and just started doing what I liked, and that's when things actually started to hit for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, we're starting to see a lot of that come around now with what's current today. Is like it takes me back to, the music when I first started getting into country music, which was probably not until like the late 80s, early 90s. I grew up, in the late 70s and 80s with, rock and, Billy Joel and, John Cougar and Skid Row and Metallica and, stuff like that. But yeah, if I go back, like listening to what's out there now, it's like, it's kind of taking me back to those Diamond Rio days, and like, you know, it's coming full circle. And I was sitting down with another writer here in town just a week or two ago, and he was talking about that, like that he's always just written true to what he is, and had some great massive hits back in the day, and hasn't had anything for years and years and years. And now all of a sudden he's been writing the same thing, but now all of a sudden that's current. So I think that's such great advice, is like,
the sooner you can get to that mindset, I think the more productive you'll be, that you can trust that. It is, because I mean, and the more you're around, it's one of those catch-22s. The more you're around, the more you realize. But if you could get there sooner, you'd be better off. So it's like, but some of that's experience, right? It's sort of doing the wrong thing for a little while can also teach you to do the right thing too. So everyone's got a different journey through this, but like right now, there's a bunch of like new people that gravitated towards each other and came up with something. And I think a lot of people's instinct is, how do I get into that? And it's like, you don't. Go make your own.
Go do your own thing.
Go do your own thing. That I can't stress that enough to the young writers, is to go find your people. Because when I was about to leave at 15 years in, Jody Williams, who at the time was running BMI, took me to breakfast, and he said, I see you. A lot of your people you grew up with hit before you. The Luke Lairds and the Natalie Hembys and stuff, they had already kind of strived. He's like, I can see you trying to catch up with them. He's like, but if you stop and look around to your left and right, which was Adam Hambrick, Emily Shackleton, like all these people, he's like, you guys are next. And I was like, oh. And it made sense that I would want to be with the people that I kind of grew up with. It makes sense that those are your instincts. And it does take somebody saying to you, just stop, like for a second. And then when I started hitting, you know, it was sort of like, oh, it was more like the people that were to my left and right, not the people that were ahead of me that I was, you know, hitching on to, or they were pulling me up. It was like literally the people that I was side by side with. It's just I was a little bit more of a late bloomer, so I found my people a little bit later as far as like really connecting to write and stuff. So
yeah. I love that. You want to play us something?
Yeah, I can
just
play
maybe
a little bit.
Verse, chorus of you pick. Just
I mean, I can. I'll just play some. I guess the newest.
Yeah.
It's just, what key can I do in this this early in the
early
morning?
in the morning, yeah.
So after those few hits, I had another hit during the pandemic with. Speaking of growing up in the late '80s and early '90s, I also was like a big fan. I wasn't super heavy metal rock, but I loved like more that Americana rock, like more the John Mellencamp, Bryan Adams, like all that stuff. And when we wrote After a Few with Travis Denning and Justin Weaver, that was sort of in that sweet spot for me. I wasn't aiming for country radio necessarily, and I really was not sure that was going to be a single. People really loved it. Like the response I got from that, from other writers and from when I'd play it out, I feel like that was just something that wasn't happening at the time. Like it was in its own lane. And I think that's one of the reasons that song worked so well. So that hit in June of 2020 after, I think right now it still holds the record for the longest time to enter the charts, to take all the way up to the number one spot, which I think we're at. I think it was 67 weeks or something like that. That song was only supposed to dip into the top 10, kind of like my Chris Lane song, and I was totally fine with it. And then the pandemic hit, and it saved the song, because they were like, well, we're not putting out something new now with this going on. So they kept on it. So, you know, again, that was supposed to be a top 10, and it ended up being a number one. So I had no control over that. And then lately, there's been a resurgence of cutting outside songs. And this song I wrote back in 2017 with Brett Tyler and a young Morgan Wallen before he had whiskey glasses. And when we did we did another story behind the song, and I was like, it was 2017. I don't really remember. And I called Brett Tyler, and I go, what did you say? Because I remember this. I remember this. He's like, oh, yeah. He's like, you brought the idea. And I was like, I did. So I went back through my book, and I found the idea, and I go, oh, yeah. This came from an episode of Sex and the City. And here's what's hilarious about it. So you can hear Morgan's tone in this song. We wrote this story song, which is my favorite stuff to write anyway. But yeah, it originated from an episode of Sex and the City, where Carrie Bradshaw says, I need to find someone to run wild as me. And I wrote that down, and I was like, so I said, what about this girl who's like needs someone to run wild with her and blah, blah, blah. So we wrote this song, and at the end of the chorus, so we started with the story, right?
Yep.
And Morgan being from East Tennessee, it was Tennessee, and then when Corey got a hold of it, he changed it to Tulsa because he's from Oklahoma, right? But I'll play you a little bit, verse, chorus, and I'll tell you about the ending of this chorus in a second.
Okay.
So it was like, she never wanted to be white picket fenced in, her heart's like a feather in a Tennessee wind. Sea salt breeze will bring her to life, and all them other boys say she's a goodbye girl. Wreck your world, leave before the morning sun. But here she is, free laying next to me, 'cause I ain't trying to tame her love. I keep the windows down and the wind in her hair, keep her heart hanging on round every turn. She ain't scared to be tied down, scared to get burned, just looking for somebody as wild as her. Wild as her, wild. So, that song, when we got to the end of that chorus, and Brett Tyler actually reminded me of this too, because I didn't remember this, because I said, you came up with that long wild thing at the end. And he goes, yeah, but only because you said we need something at the end of this, like, you know how at the end of Great Day to Be Alive, they go, ooh,
yeah,
ooh, like this. I said, we need something like that at the end. And then Brett said, you mean this? And he said he kind of jokingly threw that out. And then Morgan sang it, and we were like, yeah, that, because he sounded so good. And I took that song into the studio, cut it on a regular demo session, and then I had Morgan come in, sing the vocal over at my buddy Danik Dupel's studio over in Berry Hill, cut a vocal on him. I sang BGVs on it. And I felt so strongly about this song. I was like, here you go, silver platter to the label. And at the time, they were like, we are really hyper-focused on party songs right now. Like, they were looking for whiskey glasses, which, you know, was such a big breakthrough for Morgan. And I was like, but, you know. And then the song went on to get cut once, but it didn't do super well. So then I had a buddy up in Canada named Tyler Joe Miller, who I'd had a bunch of success with, and I said, here's a song I feel didn't get its day. It's been cut once, but do with it what you will. And Danik cut it on him, and he puts it out, and about 6 weeks into that release, 8 weeks into that release, I start getting tagged on Instagram, and I'm like, who's Corey Kent? Wait a minute, Tyler has this song out in Canada. What's this? You know, so it kind of crossed over. Everything worked out perfect for everybody. But Tyler did a great job of this song, and he took it top 10 up in Canada. And then Corey, clearly, like that thing, talk about the blowing up on TikTok or whatever. I mean, that was my first experience with that. And then Sony jumped on it and took it all the way. And I mean, and it also introduced me to Corey Kent as an artist. Yeah. He did such a good job. He made it super his own. Chris Farron cut a great track on it. It was a very happy surprise, you know? But that was also one for the outside song, right? Because I know Morgan's on it, but it is technically an outside cut that circled back after many, many years, and you don't get that opportunity very often. And then I have a new song coming out on this Cody Johnson project, which is a song from 2015. It's got Cody Johnson and Carrie Underwood on it. So and that's an outside cut too.
When is that coming out?
Well, he's just finishing his project now. They made the announcement about the song being him having a duet coming out with Carrie Underwood.
Yeah.
So, and let me tell you something. I've been trying to get a kind of Carrie Underwood cut for a decade. So when I found out she sang on it, I've lost it. I was so excited. And it's a ballad. So those don't happen that often. So I'm really excited about that one.
That's awesome. Yeah.
But it does give you, you know what, I was saying to my co-writer yesterday, I said, because he's Travis Denning, I also wrote that song with Travis Denning and Chris Stevens. And I said, you know, when I first moved to town, you'd hear songs like Bless the Broken Road. And you'd go, you know, that was a 10-year-old song. Mm-hmm. If the song comes out in the next couple years on this project and, you know, does what you hope it does, knock on wood, it'll be one of those songs people say, you know, that was a 10-year-old song. And I'm like, am I old enough to have a song that was 10 years old? I'm like, yeah, I guess I am. I guess I am, you know. So it gives a little bit of validation to, like, just trusting the process and writing something for yourself or writing something you like, and then you never know what could happen with the songs. Yeah. Because I can tell you that day we were not writing for anybody but ourselves that day. Travis and I had both gone to see the Dixie Chicks in different cities. We were just talking about album cuts on their records and how you knew every song on those records and the writers, and how just that singer-songwriter side of writing, that when we learned how to write. And I was like, we didn't have any ideas. I go, let's just write a simple love song and let's call it a day. And here we are 10 years later, and Cody Johnson and Carrie Underwood are cutting it. So, yeah, again, this is where luck comes in. Yeah. Okay, I'll take it. I had hands off that song for so long now, other than playing it out all the time. So, yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This has been so fun. I feel like we could, I mean, we'll have to do this again because there's so much more that we can dive into.
Sure.
But before we wrap up, I always end with the same question. So if you can go back to 8-year-old Kelly in Canada, now that you've kind of gone through this path and you've learned what you've learned, what advice do you give yourself?
Oh, boy. I mean, I think it all comes down to, for me, trusting and putting some validation to your own likes and skills and what you bring to the table. I mean, I think for a lot of us, there's just so much doubt that creeps in as you go through life between failures and rejections and crowds. And, you know, I'm one of those people who's, if I know you, I'm super chatty and comical, but I'm also a bit of an introvert. So I think I never wanted to bother anybody. So it made me just kind of second guess yourself a little less. Just trust what it is that you bring to the table and trust what it is. There's no reason why I shouldn't trust what I think is a good song, because I am the listener. I am the person who still cranks the radio and still listens to people and enjoys the music. I was someone who enjoyed music, so I should trust if I like it, because I was that listener. And I think I lost that a little bit. I started to kind of like worry too much about what other people's opinions were of songs that I liked, which affected my writing. So I definitely think it's just trust your journey, trust what you bring to the table. That's what I would go back and tell her.
I love it. So good.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
Been a blast.
Yeah. Fun talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody out there listening and watching. We really appreciate it. Make sure you hit that like, subscribe, and follow button wherever you are listening, and share this with your friends. We appreciate it so much. This has been another episode of Stories Behind the Songs. I'm Chris Blair, and you've been listening to Kelly Archer. We'll see you next time. This has been an episode of Stories Behind the Songs with Chris Blair. For more information after the show, head over to chrisblair.com. That's where you can find information on these episodes, trailer notes, video links, all kinds of great stuff. Also, make sure to leave us a great rating on iTunes. Like and follow us on Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. I really hope that you think this show is awesome, and we really appreciate the love and support. I promise to keep gathering great content and continuing to sit down with more amazing songwriters and artists as we grow. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for the support. We'll see you next time.